There was no way I was going to walk around this place with my dork hanging out.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. My name is Jordan, and with me, the veteran of 1,000 psychic wars, whose voice is the howling of the winds of limbo. It's Kumar.
Yes, and this week we were talking about Tits and Lasers from 1981, based on the comic book magazine Tits and Lasers, which started in the 70s.
You mean, of course.
AKA heavy metal.
Heavy metal.
Heavy metal. So heavy metal...
First of all, hold on, Kumar, before you go any further, pause the podcast.
Pause the podcast. No, there's no spoilers.
There are no spoilers in this.
No, I'm trying to
So no need to pause the podcast.
Okay.
Just settle in and be regaled with the tale of the horniest magazine that ever existed, except for Playboy.
Well, it didn't start out that horny. I think in the 70s. So in 75, this French magazine started up called Metal Hurlant, which is like howling metal or screaming metal.
Howling metal.
And the dudes over at National Lampoon somehow became aware of it. I guess on a trip to France, or they were getting submissions from France, or I can't remember the exact sequence. But they were like, okay, let's publish a U.S. version of this French magazine, and they retitled it Heavy Metal, which I think is a bad name for the magazine. I think howling metal or screaming metal would have been more distinctive.
I think it seems to have. The name seems to have been brainstormed by Leonard Mogul, who was the publisher of National Lampoon at the time. And there's no consensus that I could find that it's inspired by the music.
Yeah, no.
Heavy metal music. Although there is a certain amount of synergy there with howling metal and heavy...
maybe.
And because, I mean, there's quite a lot of howling in metal, wouldn't you say, Kumar?
Yes, but I imagine most of the artists working on Heavy Metal magazine probably did not like heavy metal. I have to imagine somebody like Moebius even hated it.
No. I think that he was just happy with the cleverness, impressed with his own cleverness, that he thought, I'll call it heavy metal because heavy metal bands do quite a bit of howling. Okay. He's the editor, he's like the publisher of National Lampoon.
Right.
I dare say it tickled his funny bone.
So, March 1977, the first issue of Heavy Metal came out.
This is the American
English
language publication.
So the French one had the most amazing array of artists, and they came from that French tradition and Belgian tradition of having the anthology comics, which is how we ended up with Tintin and Smurfs and all that kind of stuff. But this was like the version with these really heady, psychedelic, kind of science fiction comics, sometimes not, sometimes were nonsensical, fantasy kind of stuff. A lot of important artists like Guido Crepax, who we're going to come back to at some stage because he had a movie made of his work. Jean-Claude Froet, of Barbarella fame, was in heavy metal. Moebius, of course, who really went on to do a lot of movie work as well as the comics. And Chantal Montelier is another name I want to mention because a collection of her work just came out like last month or a few weeks ago of all the stuff she did for maybe heavy metal and beyond.
And Druillet, right?
Yes.
Yes. Just like the who's who of French
Absolutely,
comics.
yes. So this is all really smart, strange stuff. And I think...
Psychedelic is a great word for it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Very trippy genre blending, as you said.
Absolutely.
Sometimes science fiction, sometimes fantasy, sometimes a bit of both.
Yep.
Very kind of like bursting with creativity. A lot of especially the art, which looks really fantastic almost all the time, which is really fantastic.
Yes, especially in those days. And I think I can see exactly why the National Lampoon guys would have wanted it, because it really looks like a stoner magazine. Like, absolutely would have fit in a college dorm. It would not have been out of place at all with a huge bong going at the same time.
You couldn't mistake it for a children's comic either, because it's quite mature.
Yes.
In the sense that it's got a lot of nudity in it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, although the nudity is it's not the main point of it.
It's not, yes, I agree. It's not porn. It's not pornography.
Yeah.
It's the horniest magazine that's not pornography. It's decidedly not.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, and it's not, you wouldn't describe it as necessarily gratuitous either, but there does tend to be a set of breasts every other page.
Yes.
It's definitely, you wouldn't you wouldn't mistake it for a children's comic.
No,
and
absolutely.
it's not the kind of thing you could publish in America at the time because of the aforementioned comics code that we've discussed in earlier episodes.
Yes, yeah.
So National Lampoon apparently don't care about the comics code. They don't care about advertisers for this magazine.
It was a magazine. So this is the thing. It's not a comic. It doesn't. Only things that were considered comic books that were not magazines had to adhere to the comics code.
Brilliant.
That's how Mad Magazine survived EC Comics.
How could I forget? You mentioned it.
Yeah.
So they've got comic artists producing comic art that couldn't be produced by comic artists in America because of the code. They can buy it in from France and publish it as a magazine in America.
Although they brought in some American artists, so like Richard Corben, I don't know if he's working for the French version of the magazine, but he's from Kansas.
Okay, of course.
Which is weird.
I suppose once they have the name and a certain amount of, like, it forms a critical mass of art, they could then start bringing in American artists and start publishing it as a mixture.
So Barry Windsor Smith, well, he's British, but he had some work in there in the US versions. Dave Stevens had some work in
So
the
he did,
version.
I saw that, yep. Of Rocketeer fame.
Bernie Wrightson was in there at some stage doing something. I don't know. I just saw all these names online. So at some stage in the 80s, I think after the movie came out, things started to go bad.
Right.
And that's when I think the heady era of heavy metal, I don't know if they ran out of the French material or those French guys have moved on to other stuff or what. But it really had a goofball reputation through the 80s. I remember just when we heard about it or I'd see it on the shelf, you knew exactly that was that magazine that was just like science fiction stories with naked ladies in it.
Okay.
And you never really heard about top tier stuff coming out of there. Was bought by Kevin Eastman in 1992.
Kevin Eastman, creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Co-creator of the Teenage Mutant. He's Turtles money, and he bought heavy metal. He also founded a publishing company called Tundra, which is that's a whole story in itself, which we won't go into. But it was a great, gigantic fiasco, $14 million fiasco.
Oh my goodness.
Of Turtles money. And Kevin Eastman owned it until 2014. At 2016, Grant Morrison came on as editor for a couple of years.
Wow.
And those were pretty good. I read a couple of those issues, and they were pretty interesting. They kind of turned it around into something.
Fair enough. I can understand that.
Yeah.
He's fairly competent.
And now, I would say, recently heavy metal got sold to this company called Whatnot, and Whatnot was like gonna shut it down and restart with Volume 2. And they shut it down, and now they said they're not going to do Volume 2. So the magazine is, at this stage, officially dead. Just this past...
As of this year, right?
Couple of months, yeah.
Right, yes.
Just very, very recently, yeah. And I think that's probably all we need to say about the history of the magazine.
Is there anything to be said about Metal Yolong? Did anything interesting happen with that? Or?
I don't know. I don't even know if it's still around.
Well, once it transitions to English language, I mean, that's sort of where we pick up, and that's what we're interested in.
Yeah. So for this episode, we read an issue called One Step Beyond that came out because for some reason on the 15th anniversary of the movie's release, they re-released it into theaters.
Ahead of it coming out on home media.
Oh, that's why. I see. Okay.
1996, there was a big trouble with getting it onto home media because of the music rights.
Oh, right, of course.
Apparently the distributor had the rights to the soundtrack, so because it sold as a soundtrack album, it sold both all the kind of like cool rock songs that are on the film, and also the symphonic soundtrack that was composed for the film, and for the theatrical release, but not for any other rights. So they could sell the soundtrack, they could put it in theaters, but they couldn't put it on VHS or Betamax or whatever.
Right, yes.
Which led to it being something of a rarity, I understand, something of a lost film during the 80s and early 90s, which added to its reputation as a cult movie.
But wait a second, I saw this movie as a child, so it was on some version of home video.
It would screen on cable, so it showed on HBO twice, and people would tape it themselves, and then would distribute the tape. So it was one of those keep circulating the tape things.
There's got to be something in addition, because I don't think we had tape trading. I'm sure this is one of those videos that my older brother would have rented and brought home. Now maybe the distribution was different in Canada.
And this would have been before 96?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe Canada was
I would
an
have been
exception.
like 7, 8 years old or something.
Well, I don't have an explanation for that. That goes against
Bizarre.
but would the internet lie to me, Kumar?
I don't know.
It's a mystery. No.
Although 96 was the cusp of DVD era, so maybe we're talking about...
At least for the America, with this Canadian exception to one side for the moment,
Yeah.
at least in the case of America, it was a film that was difficult to get.
Okay.
You had people would do tape trading, as you
Okay,
pointed out. It would screen at theatres late at night, so midnight screenings and things. And it was sort of, this added to its cult appeal, because people would talk about, whoa, have you seen heavy metal? It's got lots of boobs in it, and it added to, and it's gained this cult reputation, and then as it's become more available on home media, its reputation is slipping a bit, because, as we'll get into, it's not actually very...
Right.
But we'll talk about that a bit more.
I'm wondering also if I saw it a second time in the 90s on the Canadian Sci-Fi Channel, which launched in like 98. Or if I saw a video later on as well, or if I'm conflating from some memories. Now, in your research, did you find out if this soundtrack was like the first movie that had like a stacked big like name bands, just a ton of name bands on it?
I don't know about whether it was the first. No, that didn't come up.
It seems significant to me.
But everyone talks about the soundtrack to this film.
Right.
And it really rocks.
Yeah.
It's got so many great bands.
Yeah.
Like quite a lot of metal bands, but not all metal bands.
Actually, not. I wouldn't say less.
It depends how you define metal.
Yeah.
That's a whole other issue, contentious issue that we will absolutely not get into. But yeah, absolutely rocking soundtrack. I don't know. I can't think of what would be another example of a film like that later.
From that era, I can't think of one before until I can't even think of what a soundtrack that would have like just where they just put. It wasn't until the 90s, and I'm thinking of like The Crow, like that had a soundtrack that was just like all these big bands at that time. But it had been trending to that. By the 90s, you'd have 2 CDs come out, the score and the soundtrack.
Right. Well, perhaps this was the first... Well, I don't know about first, but certainly that definitely happened.
Yeah.
So perhaps this is an early example of that phenomenon. That hadn't even occurred to me, and it didn't come up as a point of interest about the film.
Right.
Although they always praise the soundtrack, don't necessarily say it was a trailblazer in...
Okay.
Or maybe it was unusual. I think maybe on the Wikipedia it did say that it was unusual that it had both an LP of the orchestral soundtrack and all of the bands that appeared on it.
Okay.
And that was unusual.
Right.
Not normal for a film.
Right.
Well observed. We haven't even talked about the comics.
No, so let's talk about the comics. So basically what I did was so a lot of the stuff that was featured in the movie, not all of it, is in this special issue, which I downloaded maybe from archive.org, I can't remember. So I just went through them in order based on Wikipedia listing the segments of the movie. So the first one is Soft Landing, written by Dan O'Bannon.
One of the writers of Alien.
Alien, Dark Star, Return of the Living Dead, Life Force, Total Recall, storied career.
And also worked on the famous stillborn film, Jodorowsky's Dune.
Yes.
Which is apparently where he met Moebius.
Yes. And where they met Giger, who, of course, ended up designing Alien. All that originated with Jodorowsky's Dune.
Yes, Dune.
There was another connection I was trying to remember, but anyway. So the art is by Thomas Warkentin, and this is a wordless comic in which a space shuttle, ejects a Corvette,
and it sails down through the atmosphere, lands on the ground,
and it's on Earth,
and then drives off.
And then a parachute pops out, and then that's...
Does the parachute pop out after it hits the ground?
It hits the ground and bounces, and then the guy pulls a lever to eject, to deploy the parachute.
Yeah.
Which I guess slows him down.
It's funny because that's preserved in the film, and it's so odd in the film because he just hits the ground, and then the parachute goes
yes.
out the back.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything, it just gently falls to the ground. And I thought, that's odd? Was that in the comic? Confirmed it was.
Yes. And that's all it is. That's the whole thing.
Yep.
I should say there are some sound effects in here. There's some guys on the ground watching through binoculars waiting for this Corvette to land. And that's that's kind of it.
So it's a fun little artistic sequence.
It's beautiful. I don't know who this guy Thomas Warkentin is, but all of these stories were so beautifully executed.
The art's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And next we have... Okay, so according to Wikipedia, it said that the Harry Canyon story, the future cab driver in this future Hell, New York, was based on The Long Tomorrow by Jean Giraud, aka Moebius.
It's an original story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. Go on, sorry.
No, go ahead. So it was written by
I was just going to say that the Harry Canyon story is an original story for the film.
Yes.
But inspired, Oza...
It seems to be in the world of...
by Long Tomorrow.
Is it even?
No,
because Long Tomorrow is like a towering...
No, it's not. It's set in New York.
Yes, right.
And it's New York of the future, and New York is an absolute a hive of scum and villainy.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of its inspiration, I would say, from Long Tomorrow, but it's not a direct adaptation.
Yeah, no, not at all. Although I'd say the film noir, like hard-boiled detective thing is definitely a part.
Yes. Well, we've got to talk about The Long Tomorrow before we go and talk any more about the film. The Long Tomorrow is, what is it? It's, 16 pages?
Yeah, something like that.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. So much stuff happens, and I can't even remember... I didn't take enough notes on it. Now I'm thinking about it because I was like, wait, they stole the president's brain, and then there's some kind of spy from another planet that they're worried about.
The Arcturian spy?
Yes, and it's set way in the future, and this guy is like a private detective. He gets called up to the femme fatale's room.
Yeah. So it's all film noir, hard-boiled crime tropes.
Yes, but in a super bright like city.
Yeah. Yes.
In that sense, it's kind
of... Would it have been in black and white originally?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think that was done in color. Oh, that's a good question, though. Moebius does sometimes work in black and white.
I thought I read in the intro that it was appearing in color in that volume for the first time, but citation needed.
Okay.
But as you say, it doesn't look like it's nighttime, does it?
No.
Obviously not. No, it's very brightly colored.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like The Fifth Element. So if you've seen The Fifth Element, The Fifth Element we could do it on this podcast.
Yeah.
Because it's a straight adaptation of The Long Tomorrow, really.
Yeah. And Moebius did designs on it.
Right.
On Fifth Element. Yeah.
It's not an exaggeration to say it's an adaptation of The Long Tomorrow. The artist, for goodness sake, was working on this film.
Yeah. So it's got like the flying cars and the big city, and it's just so overpopulated with stuff and people.
There's just stuff everywhere. It's layers and layers and layers and layers.
Yeah.
This is super influential.
Yeah.
In fact, so when did this come out, The Long Tomorrow? 1976?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
This might be when cyberpunk was invented.
Yes.
I've seen this argued online, because this is what do we associate with cyberpunk? Obviously, dystopias, huge urban development.
Yeah.
Like big enormous cities, noir tropes.
I would say Blade Runner is totally takes from this hugely as well.
Yes. Well, I mean, I've got a quote somewhere. William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer, the trope codifier for cyberpunk, essentially, he said, he wrote in the introduction to a graphic novel adaptation of Neuromancer, he said, "It's entirely fair to say, and I've said it before, the way Neuromancer the novel looks, in inverted commas, was influenced in large part by some of the artwork I saw in heavy metal.
Right.
I assume this must also be true of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and John Carpenter's Escape from New York and all other artifacts of the style, sometimes dubbed
You know what
cyberpunk."
another one is the Boba Fett sequence in the Star Wars Holiday Special. Is that animated...
I've never seen that.
Okay, well, you gotta watch. The animated bit is awesome. It's really a great little diamond in this turd of an hour and a half. That was totally done in Moebius' style. Really, I actually love that little bit, that little Boba Fett bit.
Right, I've never seen it. Well,
and it looks just like this.
So what else to say about The Long Tomorrow? It's a fairly...
there's a famous scene. So
It's like the Maltese Falcon, right?
Yeah, I used to pick this up and flip through it all the time, and I would never know which comic it was. But my friend would say, we would talk about Moebius, and he'd say, "Do you know any Moebius comics?" Says, "I only know the one where that girl turns into a big mutant when he's having sex with her."
It's an amazing sequence.
And he's like, "Oh, that's The Long Tomorrow." Yeah, so the femme fatale turns out to be the spy, and she mutates into this blob kind of like
she turns into
Tetsuo kind of thing.
It is like Akira, like the blob from Akira, basically.
Akira also, I mean,
another film inspired by this.
Otomo was hugely inspired by Moebius, and there was a shift in his art style. You can see it from pre-discovering Moebius and after in his artwork, and that went straight into the movie as well. Yeah. And now I'm wondering about this blob thing is like...
Probably inspired Tetsuo's final form, because it looks very similar, except he's having sex with it. It's about the size of a large dog. And then of course, what a sequence!
Yeah, and then he has to kill her.
Well, he doesn't. Does he have to? It turns out she stole the president's brain. So we've talked about films that we've watched or things that we've watched being inspired by Humphrey Bogart movies before, chiefly Barbed Wire and Casablanca.
Yeah.
But so when I was reading this, I was thinking, what does it remind me of? It reminded me a bit of the Maltese Falcon.
Absolutely.
So it's essentially, if you've seen the Maltese Falcon or you're familiar with the script, that's what's going on in The Long Tomorrow.
But it's also a parody. It's not taking it seriously at all, because the final line of the story is there are 1 million stories in the city. This was 12 of them.
It's funny. It's very funny.
And he makes that guy, at one point he's attacking this guy and he lets him run away, but he has to run under a rocket that's taking off. He has to run under the thrusters and he doesn't make it.
Yeah, they're a funny... It's just very dry humour. Very kind of like hard-boiled detective. Wisecracking... private eye kind of stuff. You know, the guy that he makes run under the launching rocket is from the Assassin's Guild, and he says, I love beating up guys from the Assassin's Guild, especially when no one can see me. And he knocks the shit out of him and then makes him run under the rocket.
Yeah.
It's great. Anyway, the femme fatale, of course, is behind it. She stole the president's brain. She's an Arcturian shapeshifter, but she's fallen in love with him, she claims.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why else she turns back into her blob form when they're mid-coitus.
Yeah. Was there some sort of android double in this story?
Yes, it was tortured. She was tortured and killed.
Oh, right.
But it was an android double.
Right. So she's such a Rachel. Really?
And so she says she's fallen in love with him and begs him to run away with her. And he, in a great panel, yells, "Demon from space!" and shoots her.
Yes.
And then the comic more or less ends.
Yeah.
And it's great. If you haven't read it, my goodness, go and read it, because it's... What a comic, and enormously influential.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to Dan by Richard Corben. I wrote in my notes the word Dan, and that's my only note on Dan. Because I've read it so many times. I own literally 3 copies of Dan, and I'm volume 1, and there's a new one coming out with corrected colors very soon.
Wow.
I might have mentioned this last week, but I actually interviewed Jose Villarrubia, who's doing the restoration for the other podcast for Deconstructing Comics. Pretty recently. So, Dan it's basically John Carter of Mars. It's about this...
It even says in the first issue.
Yes, he even says it. This is my favorite isekai, by the way, I have to say. So Dan basically, I
woke up on Mars and my body is huge and muscly?
That's right. So he basically, he didn't get hit by a truck or anything, but he found his uncle Dan's notes.
Yeah.
And to make some sort of electronic device, and he made the device, and then it warped him into this other dimension, where instead of being this little kid, he's this huge muscly guy with a huge
He's not actually
schlong.
on Mars, is he? But it's like Mars. It's very red and there's red and purples.
Yeah, it's not Mars. It's this amazing place. The skies are really. I don't remember what
it's got great
the technique that he's used for doing these skies over Neverwhere.
Neverwhere is the place, right?
Yes, that's right. The world is called Neverwhere. So basically, Dan, he was kind of a kid, I guess, and he ends up in this world. He meets another girl, woman who has also been teleported from Earth, but from the 1800s.
Right.
And she's about to be sacrificed by this priestess, and Dan gets roped into... there's this kind of boy king character called Ard, who... Now, there's only about 10 pages of this, or 20 pages, in the Heavy Metal Special.
Right.
So you haven't read all these bits, but very importantly, this kid Ard recruits Dan in the comic Dan to get this MacGuffin called the Lochnar.
Oh, so that's actually in...
It's in from Dan. And it's like this... It's like a staff or a jewel, or the jewel in the staff, or both.
Fancy putting that fancy not putting that in the heavy metal film anthology comic,
Yeah.
and instead putting in 50 fucking pages of So Beautiful, So Dangerous.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a good cutoff point for So Beautiful, So... But anyway, then he basically goes around having sex with the priestess and then the queen. Because he tricks her, he distracts the queen by having sex with her while his cohorts are stealing the Lochnar.
Yeah.
And they need the Lochnar to get the bell ready. They're trying to resurrect this this being called Ulhutek.
Ulhutek?
It's Cthulhu backwards.
Cthulhu backwards, ding ding ding.
Yeah.
Ulhutek, I think it is in the film.
So I think yes, it is in here too. It's Ulhutek or something like that. It's Cthulhu back. But the main thing. So I'm really obsessed with Dan, and it's hard for me to describe what it is about it. It's not just the art, which is really, it's got that bizarre three-dimensionality that Richard Corben's work has. It looks like airbrushing, but it's some kind of special coloring technique. It's not actually airbrushing.
Kumar is literally flicking through the comic.
Flicking through
He hasn't looked at me for about 3 minutes.
And it's all about, I don't know, it's a very... weirdly sensual. I mean, you could describe it as sexual, but Corben always described it as he's trying to exaggerate the essences of the characters, and that meant the guys always had huge muscles and huge schlongs, and the women had huge boobs.
Yeah.
And there was an interview in Heavy Metal by this really hostile interviewer. This was like around the time the movie came out. He's like, "Are you a pervert? Are you homosexual?
What?
All this kind of weird stuff. Like, why do you draw this stuff? I saw your wife. She looks normal. All these kind of weird
Saw
questions.
your wife? What a thing to say to someone.
Yeah. But it's a very physical kind of thing, and actually I think it was a really good... Now, Corben had worked in animation. Okay.
Yeah, the original Den was a short film.
Short film.
I saw it on YouTube.
Short animation film. And his style is very moment to moment, so it's very cinematic. It's like kick, punch, go over here, do this, do that. It's like step to step to step.
Right.
So you think it would be a perfect translation to film. I just wanted to... Let's keep that in mind.
Right.
Keep that in mind.
Have you done a Deconstructing Comics episode on Dan?
No, on Dan. I'm waiting for the new edition to come out.
Oh, wow.
Because there were 5 volumes of Dan. Like this, they're like a couple hundred pages each, and so far 2 or 3 have been solicited for.
Let's talk no more about Dan for now, and leave everyone with bated breath for that particular episode of Deconstructing Comics.
But
and if you need a partner, Kumara, I will join you for that one.
All right. I just did want to mention that so far, and this is something to keep in mind for later in the episode as well.
Yeah.
We've had 2 stories with dudes with huge schlongs.
Yeah.
I think that's something we're going to come back to it.
Right. So the Long Tomorrow guy, his schlong is out quite a bit in that.
Yep.
Yes, and so especially in Dan.
Yep. So the next one, important one, I guess, in terms of the movie, is Captain Stern by Bernie Wrightson. Very atypical. I can't think of any other Bernie Wrightson science fiction stories. He did another another Captain Stern series. But normally he was like the horror guy.
Right.
I'm trying to think of any other. Anyway. So Captain Stern is kind of like, who's the dude in Futurama?
He's like Zap Brannigan.
Yeah, he's like that. Or we should say it's the other way around. Zap is like
Zap is like Captain Stern.
So Captain Stern is on trial for a laundry list of crimes.
Yeah.
It opens with him on trial in this court, and he tells his lawyer, like, I've got an angle, don't worry. Yeah. And the lawyer's like, he pleads not guilty, and the lawyer's like, what are you doing? You can't plead not guilty. Like,
yeah, you're so guilty.
Yeah, and Stern's like,
there are dozens of crimes of which he's been committed, like, as you said.
Yeah.
Including a single moving violation.
Yeah. Yeah. So this guy takes a stand. This character named Hanover Fist. Hanover Fist takes a stand, and Stern has paid him off to say nice things about him.
Yeah.
But Hanover Fist starts cracking as he's on the witness stand.
Yes.
And then he turns into this giant...
This is the Hulk, basically.
Yeah. He hulks out.
Yes. He's giving his milk toast. He kind of looks very much like a Nevish.
Yes.
And he's giving this milk toast kind of like defense. He's a cup of the cream of milk of human kindness and so on.
Yeah.
and then he goes, except for the preteen pedophile ring.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes. Yeah, it was prostitution ring or something.
Preteen prostitution ring. That's it.
Yeah.
Preteen prostitution ring. And it's like, whoa, what? Yeah. So and then he hulks out.
Yeah.
Wrecks the courtroom.
We don't know why he hulks out.
No.
There's no explanation of that.
Wrecks the courtroom. Chases Captain Stern, who is fleeing in terror, and even when he's alone, is gibbering in panic.
Yeah.
Is cornered eventually in a corridor, and then Stern summons up his courage and says, "All right, Hanover, you've got this coming," and then he pays him.
Yeah.
So it was all a setup.
Yes.
For Hanover Fist to presumably has the ability to turn into the Hulk, and I guess he needs to work himself up to it, which is why he had those outbursts. He turns into the Hulk, wrecks the courtroom, and Captain Stern is able to escape in the confusion and presumably go on with his adventures.
Right.
A bit odd because Captain Stern is still at no point drops the masquerade. Even when he's alone, he's still saying, "Got to get away from this guy," and so on. And I actually think the film handles this better.
Okay.
So we'll get to that.
Okay. But it does, it reminded me of that scene in The Dark Knight Rises when Catwoman disappears and Batman's alone on the roof and he says, "So that's what that feels like." When there's nobody else around and it's Batman's voice.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so there was no reason for Stern to be acting scared of the guy he paid off. And yet he was. When he was alone.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, you could headcanon this stuff. You could say there's security cameras around or something. I don't know.
It doesn't
matter. It's really an 8-page gag.
Actor. Yeah. Yes.
It's just it's an 8-page.
I only bring it up because I think the film handles it a little better.
Okay. And the last, is it? No, okay, we've got So Beautiful, So Dangerous by Angus McKie, who's a British artist, who I only learned about, I'm going to say in the last 6 months to a year for some reason. Somehow I stumbled across his artwork. I was like, whoa, what is this? It has a look like...
That's better than me, because I learned about it in the last 6 days to a week.
Yeah, well, this is very recent for me, but it looks like the artists who did the Wacky Packages, if you've ever seen those, or Garbage Pail Kids.
Yes.
I mean, all these artists have a kind of very painterly... very three-dimensional style. Stuff feels really like action figures.
His style does remind me a bit of Richard Corben's style as well.
A little bit, yeah.
And he does do beautiful backgrounds.
Yes.
So a lot of this comic is spaceships and space stations and enormous cities in space.
Yeah.
Just sort of being there in the background while his fairly ugly kind of characters are in the foreground doing fairly ugly things.
Yeah.
Sleeping with one another, doing drugs, doing pop psychology and undergraduate philosophy.
Yeah, but I think there's...
This bored me to tears, and I can't believe there were so many pages of it.
So it's 60 pages.
60 pages!
I actually liked it. Because you never know what's going to happen in it. It's constantly shifting gears, and I actually think it's a parody of a lot of those things you mentioned. I think it's a parody of the pop college psychology kind of stuff, and like the bit where they meet like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy in a space mine, like out way somewhere out in the galaxy, and they've been kept alive. And where they get sent movies out there, like they get bootleg videotapes from Earth, so they've seen like the latest movies. I'm trying to remember. Some of the movies they named were really like funny that like Dostoevsky was like, oh yeah, I've seen this one. It was just like something so prosaic and mundane and stupid.
Yeah.
So basically it starts with this guy who's on TV talking about the possibility of other life being in the universe. And he quotes that famous formula, I can't remember what it's called.
The Drake equation.
The Drake equation. And he gets down to basically there's only one and it's us. But meanwhile we cut to outer space. This alien called Sisyphus and his robot Atlas, his robot partner.
There's so many pseudo-intellectual references in it to mythology and the classics. I kind of get what he was trying to do, but I just found it a bit tiring.
But he doesn't stick with that. So they arrive on Earth. Earth people freak out. They're like, okay, get on board if you want to go to another planet.
Yeah.
And only the worst, like, the dregs of society are like, okay, we're getting out of here. But they're all, like, really, like, he kind of is making fun of them and how like provincial they are about going to space. They just want to get out of paying taxes or whatever.
So someone will be dodging alimony.
Yeah.
Other guys, is just bored. Another guy wandered on because he was high and didn't know what he was doing. Yeah. It's very satirical. Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, I get that I get it. It's a satire.
Yes.
And look at the space travelers. It's all just the refuse of humanity.
Yes. And then these women fall for Atlas. They think he's cute, and they wander off with him. That'll come back later.
Oh, yeah. That's the whole story.
They go through space. There are these giant naked women in space, and this is kind of the
Sirens of Titan.
Yeah, and they're like, whoa, look at those ladies. But this is like, in the comics, that's the kind of thing. There'll be a naked lady. Then we'll see a naked lady, and he's been transported into this giant muscular body, and he's like super attracted to, Kathleen. Kath. He's, you know, and that kind of, it's almost incidental. It's not the main point of it. Like, they drive by this thing and they're like, whoa, and this guy starts making comments about their breasts and their bodies and stuff, but it's just like a few panels.
Well, it's just a reference.
Yes.
The Sirens of Titan is a novel by Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah.
So he's just made a thing. Look, a thing in space, and he's given it a name with a reference to a classic novel. So although it was pretty new in those days, actually, in the 70s. Yeah.
Right. So Atlas ends up sleeping with one of these women, which I thought it reminded me of Barbarella when she slept with that robot.
Yes. Yes.
And so they arrive at this huge space city station thing. I can't remember what it's called.
It's like an artificial planet at the center of the galaxy, I think.
Yeah, but when they get there, like, the president of that planet, or whatever, the leader, is being blackmailed by these aliens, other aliens. And those aliens are scared of humans, so they forcibly send two of the humans that they've brought from Earth to go fight this guy.
They're our kind of point of view characters, aren't they?
Yes.
One of them looks a bit like Woody Allen and has the neuroses to go with it.
Especially early on, he really makes him look like Woody Allen. A little bit less so later. God, yeah. So somehow he ends up actually psychoanalyzing the alien to convince him to become friends.
It's about three.
But they end up letting, like, they let the alien blackmail that leader for a little while longer. And I think this is why they're sent to a mining colony to work, like, for that crime. I can't remember exactly why they get sent there.
It's very stream of consciousness.
So so they work in this mine where they meet Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, as I mentioned before, who've been kept alive, and then finally they escape or are freed somehow. Oh yeah, they escape, I think, and then they fly to this giant robot. This huge robot that was in the... I can't remember what he was. I'm just flipping through the pages now, trying to remember. He was some sort of ancient being that gave up on life, and now he's finally starting to talk again. And that's kind of the end of it?
Yeah, it just pretty much ends there. So, and none of that makes it into the film, except for the Congress between the robot and the lady. There's literally the only thing that makes it into the film.
Yes, and then they crash... okay, let's talk about this one.
All right, well, next let's talk about Arzak.
Oh yeah, Arzak. We do have to talk about Arzak.
Which inspired the final sequence in the film, Tana.
Yeah, so...
Arzak, compared to So Beautiful, So Deadly, which we just talked about, Arzak, I think, is brilliant.
Yes.
I absolutely love it.
Well, okay, so I do like So Beautiful, but no shade on Angus McKie. He's not Moebius. Right.
Right.
Only Moebius is Moebius.
Yeah. Well, this is phenomenal. So it's short. It's essentially very short stories without no writing.
Yeah.
So no dialogue, no captions, just silent stories in a fantastical world.
Yep.
Where our main character, who is presumably Arzak, although we're never told.
Yeah, we're only told in Moebius's afterword for the Epic Edition.
Right, which I didn't read.
Okay.
He wanders this lurid landscape, encounters fantastic beasts, bosoms.
He's kind of a voyeur, yes. He's a little bit... Two of the stories, I think he's like a kind of a peeping Tom.
He flies around on what I thought was a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
A pterodactyl-like beast.
Yeah. And sometimes he uses one for haulage. He has two. He has like one with all his packs on it.
There's a great story. Well, there's a great sequence where his pterodactyl stops flying, and then it cuts away to a city. Yeah. And within that city, there are people sweating and straining to repair something.
Yes.
And then once it's repaired, we cut back to Arzak, and his pterodactyl is flying again, and he flies off on it. And it's like, what just happened?
Yeah, that guy goes into the pyramid, does a repair, because the guy sees on the screen that the bird is not
flying.
He fixes it remotely from the inside of the pyramid. Or
is he inside the bird?
Oh.
So you just don't know. It's just crazy, surreal, fantastic surreal imagery, and it's really fun.
It's not even the last Arzak story. You don't even know what happens, because he flies towards some kind of city, then you see him sitting like naked inside, and that's kind of the end. You're like, what happened? It's just images.
Another very influential comic.
Yeah, now he talks about in that afterward how he was working almost it was pure subconscious flowing out of him. Like, he was like, Arzak's hat, that cone hat, and all the towers, he's like, I didn't plan to put all that phallic imagery in there. That's what it is. And he's like, all the bones and skulls, he's like, I was so depressed at the time or whatever, and all this death imagery is in it, but it wasn't planned. It was just like, he just ended up drawing all these giant carcasses, like giant rib cages of crate dragons, like, in the desert, and he's like, I didn't think of all the skulls and stuff, but that's just what came out of me.
Yeah. It's very, it's just like he pulled out his imagination and slapped it on the page.
Yeah.
And it looks fabulous. If you can read that, I very much recommend it.
Yeah. So, okay, now 1981 we get this movie.
Okay.
Now, initially, when we started this podcast, I wanted to avoid animation. And the reason was that I felt animation was if you have a comic and it's got a very particular idiosyncratic art style, like all of the artists we've talked about today, and you make an animation, my feeling was, well, that's a cheat, because you can just copy that style. It's not like trying to film with live action. No, this movie proves you can't cheat a Moebius or a Richard Corben or Angus McKie or anybody.
Nope. No, you can't. No matter how many art studios you hire, animation studios rather, no matter how... You can hire 10, say, which is how many worked on this film, and none of them look any good, and they certainly don't capture the...
No. I think Tarna... So some of the stories seem to be rotoscoped.
Yeah.
In a Ralph Bakshi... It's very low-rent Bakshi, but it's a kind of a Ralph Bakshi style.
That's true. Rotoscoping is where you film something.
The actors or whatever, and then you draw, frame by frame, you draw over them.
So yes, parts of this were rotoscoped.
So the Tarna stuff
was rotoscoped. With the car crash landing on Earth, that was rotoscoped.
What about Harry Canyon? That looked rotoscoped.
I think maybe... I can only say definitely Tana and Corvette introduction, but probably Harry Canyon as well.
Okay. Directed by Gerald Potterton, who is Canadian, I don't know.
This is a Canadian film.
It is considered a Canadian film. There's Canadian money in it as well, probably. He died about a year ago, and this was, as I mentioned at the end of last week, I was like, oh, this would have been a good first episode. Like, we were missing, there were things happening, and I was like, oh, this would be a good one to cover, and we didn't.
Oh, instead, it's a year later.
Yeah. Now, 1981, so at this stage, we haven't had Akira come out in the US, or Ghost in the Shell. So we haven't really had nudity and adult animation.
Right.
Except for some weirdo Bakshi stuff like Fritz the Cat from the 70s, which is, I would imagine, pretty underground compared to... Yeah. This seemed like it was meant to be an overground...
Yes.
Mass market kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So it would have been, I'm guessing, pretty shocking as a... conceptually to have...
Yes, and yes. This film, apparently... This was inspirational to a bunch of people.
Yes.
So it's, as you say, for us, we live in a time where there is a lot of animation which is intended for a mature audience, mature ideas, mature themes, and yes, mature imagery. So, but at this time, there's nothing like it, as you say.
Right.
Nothing. Not even the Japanese stuff hasn't even filtered over to the Western market.
Yeah.
It's really just Ralph Bakshi, and that's pretty much it. So this is like, as you say, like, it's hard for us to imagine what kind of impact it would have had on people. Because we watch it now, and as we've hinted at, you and I, this doesn't look very good. The animation, the quality of animation is pretty poor by the standards to which we're accustomed.
Doesn't even look as good as, like, The Wall, which I think would be the closest, like, stoner cartoon to be watching.
Well, The Wall is only partly animation.
Yeah, of course.
There's a lot of live...
Anyway,
Yes, so we'll talk a bit more about that later on.
Yes.
But yes, that hence its reputation as this cult film during the 80s and early 90s, when there's still not a lot of adult animation around, and people are like, oh, you've got to see heavy metal. I can get a tape. I've got a tape. It was taped off HBO at midnight, or we can go see it at the theatre at this like late screening or what have you.
Right.
And it'll blow your mind. It's got bosoms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And apparently quite a few people were inspired to get into animation or at least were founded.
I could kind of understand it.
And we can talk a bit more about what it went on to inspire a bit later.
Right. Okay. Right. So we start with Soft Landing for the opening credits, which I thought was brilliant. That's a way to use that story in your movie.
Yes, it's great.
But he continues on from the landing. So the astronaut lands on Earth in his Corvette, drives up to a house, and in this house is his daughter.
Yes.
And he
walks into the house still wearing his astronaut outfit.
Yeah.
Astronaut outfit. His spacesuit.
Yeah.
Astronaut outfit.
Yeah.
Can we cut that? Anyway, moving on. He has a package. It's something he's brought back from space. And it's this glowing green sphere.
Yeah.
The Lochnar.
Yeah.
He touches it, it melts him. This does this to a few people, but only in the early half of the
It's
film.
very inconsistent what it does. It is very much... I feel like we've seen this trope before, where you have a thing to link the stories, but the thing is not consistent. I'm sounding very vague about this, but
that's fine. This is a vague framing device. So essentially, the Lochnar is the embodiment of pure evil.
Yes.
And it seems to have it's kind of like the One Ring. Everybody covets it, especially if they're evil, and it seems to have a kind of sinister effect on people. It corrupts the innocent and makes the evil more evil, and it can bring back the dead.
Yes.
And it talks. It's malign.
Yes.
It has an intelligence. It has a malign intelligence and an agenda, because spoilers. It's come to this little girl's house in the company of her father, the astronaut, to kill her specifically.
Okay.
Because she has the power to destroy it, as we discover.
Oh, is that what that was?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And yes. So, but first it wants to torment her. So it torments her by showing it her visions of its terrible influence across the cosmos. Okay. Beginning with
2031 in New York.
Yes.
With Harry Canyon, the cab driver. So
Bruce Willis, essentially, imagine.
Oh my God! It was really this.
There's even the same gag. Yeah. Where someone gets in his cab. So in the Fifth Element, the film, it's the exact same gag.
Yeah.
So in the film, The Fifth Element, Corben Dallas is in his apartment, and a guy tricks him into opening his door and then holds him up and says, "Give me the cash!"
Yeah, that guy,
and then Corben pulls a gun on him, takes his gun off him and puts it in a rack where he has dozens of other guns of all the other idiots that have tried to rob it. The exact same thing happens in this sequence in this film. Harry's sitting in his cab, he's off duty, someone knocks on the window, says, "Hey, are you taking customers? Are you taking passengers?" He says, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Turns it on, lets him in. Then the guy wants to go to the UN building.
Yeah, which is now an apartment.
Yeah, which is now an apartment. And, because this is a crap sack world.
Yeah.
But then the guy pulls a gun on him, he wants the cash, but Harry has a switch which he operates with his foot.
Right.
He flips kind of like the safety off, he presses it with his foot, zaps the guy, zaps everything except his gun, which he promptly picks up, opens the glove compartment.
Yeah. And
it's full of lots of other guns. Yeah. It's the exact same joke, and I was so thrilled to see it.
I did notice in one scene there was a billboard for Jaws 7, and we didn't have 7 Jaws, but I think we're up to 7 Sharknadoes, or 6. By 2031, there will be 7
definitely
for
be
sure.
7. Yeah, I love it.
And this guy this archaeologist has dug up the Lochnar in the desert in this sequence, and it's on display in a museum. And the museum is attacked by these thugs that are trying to steal it or something like that.
Yep.
And the girl who's the daughter of the archaeologist comes out, and she's the femme fatale. She gets into the cab.
Yes.
Her life is in danger, and he has to rescue her.
Yeah. We have some very hard-boiled dialogue. I don't normally get mixed up with this kind of thing. Yeah. It's my policy not to, but what do you know? I'm a sucker for a pretty face, or whatever. And then he takes it to the cop station, and this is a nightmarish police station. There's an alien being dragged out. The alien says, "I'm an American citizen. I just lost my papers."
Yeah, and then there's an illegal alien joke.
Yeah, the illegal alien joke. He goes to the desk. John Candy is the desk sergeant. Yes. Not the last John Candy role in this film.
No, it's the first of 3 at least.
Yes, at least 3, possibly 4, depending on how you count it. Who announces that it will be $1,000 a day for police attention on whatever matter he has brought to him. Harry flips him $1. "Here's $1. Thanks for your time," or "Thanks for nothing," or whatever. And then he walks away he's carrying the girl, she's faint. Anyway, he takes her back to his apartment. She pleads with him, tells him the story, as he pointed out, that her father dug up the Lochnar. These guys want it. She wants protection. He just sort of wanders around being like a bachelor, eating a disgusting mayonnaise sandwich. He goes, "There's beer in the fridge, you can sleep on the couch, you'll be safe here." She comes in the room and sleeps with him. Yep. All very par for the course. In the morning he wakes up.
Very graphic sex scene.
Yes,
very All the sex scenes are really graphic,
yes.
And they, considering they were probably rotoscoped, it was like, I wonder how this was done.
Those parts weren't rotoscoped. No, I read, in doing... It was hard... There's actually not a lot of detail about this movie online. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people writing now, in the last couple of years, talking about, the impact of heavy metal.
Right.
But not a lot of stuff about the development. Mm-hmm. The Wikipedia article is very empty and just sort of links to news reports and things.
Right.
But I did eventually find an article that was published in the Heavy Metal magazine itself in August 1981. And one of the things that this article pointed out was that they had about 70 different animators working on it.
Right.
And one thing they observed was that after decades of working on cartoon animals, apparently they had to be toned down in how much sex they put into the movie. Just they were so thrilled to be working on something that wasn't Donald Duck.
Right.
They, they're saying, hey, maybe can we have a bit less bush in this scene?
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
Apparently that kind of thing was occurring.
Yeah. So then they make a deal where they're going to exchange the Lochnar for the money.
Oh, you forgot where he's shaken down by the two different factions. Oh, I love this because it's so Maltese Falcon. So first the cops wake him up. Bang, bang, bang. They come in, they wake him up. Where's the girl?
She's gone. She's disappeared.
Where's the girl? Oh, he's like, what girl? He's like, don't play smart with me, Harry. If she calls you, you call us. If she doesn't, you're dead. And then they leave. Great, love it. Then he goes out to his cab to work. There's someone in his cab.
Yep.
He gets ready to push the pedal.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the guy tries to hold him at knife point. He gets ready to push his pedal. But then a big, fat, disgusting guy who's just like the big, fat, disgusting guy from the Maltese Falcon, right? The guy in the white suit. I forget the name of the character. The guy's fanning himself all the time. It's great. He gets in, he's like, I am interested in the Lochnar. I represent certain business associates for Venus, and we will pay you, however much.
Yeah.
But we're getting impatient, so tell the girl to contact me. Yeah, great. Perfect. Anyway, then Harry receives a message. It's to meet the girl. As you said, they meet up at the Statue of Liberty. They decide to split the 300,000 space bucks. They go back, and the exchange goes... No one double-crosses one another. Yep. The exchange goes off without a hitch. But then the big, fat, disgusting guy tries to touch the Lochnar. That's a mistake. It melts him.
Yeah.
Then the girl... They're driving away, and Harry's like, baby, we're rich. Let's go on a holiday. Just the two of us. She's like, no, sorry, I'm going to be taking it all.
Yeah, she double-crosses him,
She pulls a gun on him. She double-crosses him. He activates the pedal, zaps her. He goes, she was beautiful. But dumb. Oh well, I chalked it up to a 2-day fare with one hell of a tip.
Yeah.
Then he drives away.
Yeah. So, what do you make of this one? I think, because obviously, because of the Wikipedia article, I was comparing it to Long Tomorrow, but it's lacking the silliness of Long Tomorrow. It kind of takes itself...
It plays it straight. Yeah, it's
straight,
it's not satirical enough.
Yeah, it's not enough. I think there's a little bit in there, but it's missing that there are 1 million stories in this city, and this is 12 of them.
There is a bit. It's not too bad. I think it's all right. It's probably one of one of the better sequences in the film because it does have Harry is funny. He a lot of everything that comes out of his mouth is a film noir cliche, and that's amusing.
Yeah.
When he's making love to her, he's like, I gave her the real stars and stripes and all this crazy dialogue.
Yeah, but somehow maybe
the cop station, with the illegal alien joke's a bit on the nose, but the cop who wants John Candy, the desk sergeant, wants $1,000 a day. It's $1,000 just for us to take a look, and then it'll be $1,000 for every day we're on the beat or something like that. And to me, I liked it. I thought it had a sense of that Long Tomorrow kind of fun poking.
I think there was, but I think with Long Tomorrow that. Plot it shifts gears so many times. You don't know what's going to happen. It's got the president's brain. It's kind of ridiculous, and there's also the designs, like the PI's. The design of his costume is so weird.
Yes.
In that, and all that kind of ridiculous.
No, I completely agree. There's no comparison.
Yeah.
There's no comparison. It's an okay adaptation. There's some elements, but as you pointed out, Moebius's art. It's not there.
Yeah.
The thrilling cityscape which went on to inspire so many cyberpunk aesthetics, and not to mention The Fifth Element.
Yeah.
Very much like The Fifth Element. You know, in Long Tomorrow, they all live underground, but it doesn't look like underground. It looks like a towering megacity.
Yeah.
And it's only later on that your perspective is flipped and you realise that the surface is barren and just taken up by spaceports and landing zones.
Yeah.
And everything we've just seen is actually kilometres deep under the surface of the Earth, but it looks like a city of skyscraper. And all of that's missing. Instead, it's just kind of like a crappy New York.
Yeah.
Graffiti everywhere. Yeah, so, you know, in the 70s, New York was pretty unpleasant.
Yeah.
So someone's been to New York, looked around and said, well, what if it just gets more unpleasant? And then that's essentially what this film is. It's just like every single square metre of the city is covered in graffiti.
Yeah.
The cops are utterly corrupt.
Yeah.
People are getting held up in their taxis all the time. It's just 70s New York times a million.
Yeah.
Not super imaginative, I agree.
Yeah.
But one of the better sequences in the film, I think.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think next is Dan.
Yeah.
So this time we get John Candy as the voice of Dan, which is inspired.
And Dan and Den.
Yes.
I'll let you explain.
But he is really dumb. Like, he appears in this world, he's transported. So it's done more sequentially. In the Den comic, you don't learn how he got transported there until a few pages later into it. Here it's done pretty much in sequence, where we see him building the machine, and then he finds a Lochnar.
It's the Lochnar that sends him.
And then it teleports him into this other world.
He finds it in his garden. It's a meteor, or meteorite rather. So he's dug up a meteorite that's landed in his yard. This perfectly spherical green meteorite, glowing. Doesn't melt him when he picks it up. As you said, some inconsistencies in how the Lochnar works there. He takes it in and places it in his mineral collection. So he's a nerd, and he's quite, you know, he's a bit of a string bean, he's skinny, he's wearing glasses, he's a stereotypical kind of nerd. Although I think he's of age, he's 18, I think.
I don't think we get his age in the comic, but he's 18 in this,
fair enough.
But he looks similar.
Yeah. Then there is a technological element, because he's built a voltometer or something to measure lightning when it strikes his house. The lightning strikes his house, powers up his machine, then the Lochnar starts glowing ominously, the Lochnar and his machine interact, and he's catapulted into the other world, into the body of Dan.
Yes. Now, as I said, I think it's inspired to choose John Candy to voice the muscle-bound Dan, but he's so monosyllabic when he speaks. He's like, when he sees his schlong, he's like, big, like that. And he just says like one word,
Well, I find that, I find it funny, because we contrast his inner monologue, which is still in his weedy Dan voice, the same voice that we've been hearing all along.
Yeah.
But when Dan utters dialogue, he utters it in John Candy putting on a deeper voice. And I quite like the contrast between the loquacious, nerdy inner monologue and the taciturn, grunting outer monologue. Outer dialogue, I should say.
I get it, but I think it works in isolation in the movie.
Yes.
But I think in contrast to the themes.
Yes.
So as soon as he arrives, he covers himself with a loincloth.
Yes.
Right?
Which he
That's
doesn't
the first thing he does.
Yes. No, I can't walk around here with my dork hanging out.
Yes. Can't walk around with my dork hanging out. No, in the comic, that's the point. The point of the comic is his dork is hanging out, and it's the physicality of those characters.
Yes.
In the comic, that's part of the whole thing of it, and that's why I think it's.
That's fair. And also, Dan is not very funny, the comic, right?
No, almost never. There's very few gags in it.
Whereas this sequence is funny.
Yes.
It's been written to be funny.
Yeah.
I think I agree with what you're saying, because I only read those few pages of Dan, enough to get the sense of it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I saw Heavy Metal long before I ever read a Dan comic.
Right.
So as you say, it works well for me, because I'm not steeped in the Richard Corben's art or the world that he created or the themes of his storytelling. Instead, I just see this fun sequence, which for many people is their favourite in the film.
Yeah. Well, I remember even as a kid, however I saw this movie, I remember my older brother saying how the thing they knew about Heavy Metal was the size of Dan's schlong. This is what they...
You hardly see it.
Well, not in the movie, but he was talking about it in the magazine, because he had read the magazine, and he's like, Dan has this giant cock, and it's like, I can't remember the exact sequence of this conversation.
Right.
But...
Sure. And he puts a loincloth on, and as you say, there's plenty of bosoms.
There's a split second where you actually see it when he's being transported into the world, but that's about
So we have the usual rule that that dicks are beyond the pale, but boobs are fine.
Yes,
because
exactly.
this sequence has endless boob.
Which makes me kind of think, why choose Den to be one of the things?
Whoever wrote this segment had a plan, and the plan was to contrast a nerd from 20th century America with a muscle-bound Conan-style warrior.
Yeah.
And it works. It's funny. And John Candy is a big part of why it works, because his delivery is hilarious.
Yeah.
You know, he meets Kath. He like you said, just like the story in the comic, he saves Kath from a sacrifice involving the Lochnar. He rescues her, and she's naked.
Yeah.
He puts her down, and they start talking. And he says, I couldn't stop looking at her. She had the most beautiful eyes.
Yes.
And meanwhile, our point of view is just an absolute eyeful of her chest.
Yeah.
Because that's all you can see.
Yeah.
And John Candy just really sells it over and over.
You know,
when he swims away through the water tunnel, he says, "Normally, I'd be dead now."
Yeah. Yeah. No, I actually, again, I don't know how he saw this movie, but I read Dan, the comic, in John Candy's voice.
Amazing.
The narrative captures.
That's putting the cart before the horse.
Because that was, because when I saw it, now I'm thinking I might have been maybe as old as 12. I don't remember how, again, this is very mysterious now. But, so I mean, part of it works, but it's so thematically against, I feel like, a violation of all the things that he was going for.
Right.
In a strange way. And also, another thing here is the art was so much worse than what Richard Corben's art. Now, they followed the kind of line work. I mean, it looks like Dan, it looks like Kath, it looks like the priestess and the queen. The scene where he walks in on Ard, the boy king, who's got his leg up on the chair of his arm, is that shot straight out of the comic. Okay. And I'm like, I can see it, and then they've gone for this weird physical effect for the sky to replicate the work that Corben did, which is they've done some kind of swirly fluid like they did for the transporters in Star Trek, right? Where they just had some liquid in a glass and they somehow overlaid it. And I'm like, okay, you're trying to do something, but this doesn't inspire anything like the kind of wonder I feel
it looks,
reading Dan.
Yeah, and as I've said already, coming at it from our perspective in 2023, having seen a lot of really great animation, it looks so lame. It looks awful.
Yeah.
It's just terrible.
Yeah.
It's just really poor quality animation.
Yes.
And art.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Then we had was it the Stern next? Captain Stern, was that the next sequence?
Yes, next is Captain Stern. I don't have anything else to say about Dan except that there's quite a good gag, a translation gag, where they're wandering through the catacombs and he's with a gorilla that speaks wonderful Queen's English. Yeah. Sorry, that should be King's English. Yeah. And he's translating for the other goons that are going with them to steal the Lochnar. It's like, they're just worried about, there's allegedly a terrible beast down here that's always starving and has 6-inch fangs. Oh, sorry, 16-inch fangs. Yeah. There's some great little bits like that all through it. Yes. All right, on to Captain Stern. Voiced by Eugene Levy.
Well, I was not expecting a all-star upgrade for Eugene Levy in this episode, but certainly have. Joe Flaherty, another SCTV alumni, is in this as the lawyer as well.
Incredible.
And it plays out pretty similar, except this time Hanover Fist transforms because he's got the Lochnar.
Yes.
That's the thing that mutates him into this Hulk.
Which I think is an improvement storytelling-wise.
Yes.
So he finds the Lochnar, it's the size of a marble. He picks it up and it interferes with his testimony this time. So it's not Hanover Fist psyching himself up to Hulk out and all part of the plan.
Yeah.
Here, it seems Stern, who seems like an idiot, really, like a Zap Brannigan-style idiot, really thought that a paid testimony was going to get him off an endless list of heinous charges.
Yeah.
But the Lochnar turns him into this beast. Again, it all plays out the same.
Even the door, when he gets to the door with the the wheel on it, you have to turn to get through.
Yes. But now it makes sense that Stern is running in terror because he's in genuine danger and it's not just a masquerade.
Yeah.
Then it plays out the same when they reach the end. He screws up his courage and says, "You've got this coming, I suppose." And then he pulls out the money.
Yeah.
And the money turns Hanover Fist back into his...
Yes.
like weak form.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So there's even that doesn't happen in the comic. He doesn't turn back. He just stays in Hulk
Which
mode.
again, I think kind of like emphasizes that it's the supernatural influence of the Lochnar.
Yes.
But then Stern does something which he also doesn't do in the comic, which is he pulls a lever and kills Hand Over Fist by dumping him into space because it's on a space station.
Yeah.
And I think, again, this is the effect of the Lochnar. The Lochnar makes, as we said, corrupts the innocent and makes the evil more evil.
I think you're giving it a bit of credit. I think because Stern is a bad dude, we know from the list of crimes.
Yes.
Anyway.
He is a bad dude. Well, it's possibly the influence of the Lochnar. I only bring it up because I think there was a hint in the Fifth Element segment that the lady wasn't going to betray Harry.
Okay.
It was the influence of the Lochnar that made her betray him.
Oh.
Because there's a line of dialogue that comes straight after the segment ends where the Lochnar says, "I corrupt the innocent," or something like that.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if it was having a similar effect on these characters at the end of that
I don't
segment.
think Stern was innocent, but yes.
but it made him worse.
Yes. Yeah, right. But again... They've got Bernie Wrightson's line work here, but that lovely shading and toning that he does is not there.
No.
It's very two-dimensional.
Two-dimensional is a great word for it. Yes, it's flat.
All these comics are really three-dimensional through various effects.
Yes.
All these have tried to create three-dimensional worlds.
It looks flat and insipid and kind of like lifeless.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. All the way through. Yeah. Although, this next one, it probably looks the best of the lot and is my favourite. B-17.
Well, this is interesting because there wasn't a comic for it. It was made new for the movie. This seems to be a rotoscoped one. It's about a bomber.
Yeah, they actually visited a museum and as you said, it was rotoscoped. They took pictures of footage of a B-17 bomber.
Okay, yeah.
And even apparently it was still working.
Okay.
It was one of the few that you could still run.
Okay.
And they even fired it up and recorded some of the sound.
Okay, right.
According to the article, the 1981 article.
Okay. So, wow. So they get shot up. The Lochnar appears like a UFO.
Yep.
Their B-17 gets shot up.
Well, it's like one of those Foo Fighters or Gremlins that appeared to bombers during the Second World War.
And the crew is all killed, but then they come back as zombies.
Yeah.
The plane crashes in the jungle.
Yep.
One guy is left alive.
He parachutes out before he's about to get grabbed and eaten by zombies.
Yeah.
And then you think he's safe. You breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
But this island, as you pointed out, this jungle island, he wades ashore and it is full of crashed aircraft from all these different eras.
Yeah.
Every kind of aircraft. You know, not post World War II, but going back to the to sort of like a prop plane, a biplane, and then zombies start crawling out of every single one of those planes, and they converge on him.
And that's the end.
At the center of the island, and at the end, and it's really, really sinister segment.
Yeah,
quite frightening. I admit to having goosebumps while I watched it.
Might have been because of the rotoscoping. That might have helped with the motion of the actors and stuff like that.
And I feel, although as you say, it's not inspired by anything that appeared in heavy metal, it does remind me a lot of an EC style comic.
Yes, absolutely it does. And I think I feel like also the thing about the gunner being trapped in the dome is a thing that's been in several media, and
I believe that it was common for those gunners to die in that position.
Right. Okay.
They were very vulnerable when they were outside the fuselage.
There was an episode of Amazing Stories, I remember, where I think we've talked about Amazing Stories and you've never seen it, but it was a Steven Spielberg produced show, but there was a gunner down there and he has a pad and a pencil, and the wheels are not...
he draws the wheels on the landing gear.
The landing gear's not coming down, so he imagines super hard and draws, and then they actually...
That sequence is notorious as an example of romanticism of the Second World War. Because if your landing gear went out and then you landed the bomber and there was a guy in that gunning pod, he would die because the plane would crash onto him.
Right.
So the idea is that he just had to wish hard enough and he could draw... And they're like literal like candy cane kind of like legs, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't quite
I've never seen it, but I've read about it I've literally read about it because it's considered like this totally crazy thing that shows the way that World War II is kind of treated differently in the popular imagination as a kind of like good magic war. Anyway, that's a whole other matter.
So Beautiful, So Dangerous?
This is alright because it doesn't really adapt anything from the comic, and it just has...
I'm going to say the opposite, but go ahead.
Alright, so my opinion is, it's short, it already has that advantage over being 60 pages
It's very short.
You've essentially just got a bit. And the bit is the robot sleeping with the girl they abduct.
Yeah, so basically this one, instead of a TV thing, it's the Pentagon is meeting to talk about aliens. The guy gives the Drake equation. He says, we're the only ones. Aliens show up. They suck up 2 people from Earth.
Well, he malfunctions. The Doctor turns out to be a robot controlled by the aliens, telling the Pentagon that there are no aliens.
Okay.
Then he malfunctions and he sort of attacks a secretary or a stenographer.
Wait a second. Yes, he does attack her.
The Wikipedia says he...
No, she has a jewel that's like the Loch-Nar.
Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah.
And then he attacks her.
He says shiny, and then he jumps on her and sticks his face in her cleavage. The Wikipedia article says he motorboats her.
was he a robot?
He was a robot.
Oh, okay.
Because they abduct both of them, and as they arrive on the ship, because they're sucked up through a pneumatic tube.
Yeah.
As they arrive on the ship, he falls to pieces, the scientist.
Yeah.
And then the John Candy in his third...
As Atlas, who's not named as Atlas, but yes.
No, as Atlas the robot says, oh, geez, you realize how much work it's going to be to put him together.
Yeah.
And so he's not only is the scientist that's arguing against the existence of aliens is actually a robot controlled by aliens, and then they abduct him when he malfunctions and accidentally abduct a stenographer rather, as well. And then Atlas...
Oh, I see. So they weren't planning to suck up...
No.
Okay.
And they should have put it back.
Getting it now.
Yeah, well,
okay.
There's not really much to this. The whole thing is just sort of an extended joke where Atlas and the ladies...
Yeah, and then the 2 pilots have these long, like, elephant snouts, and then they pour some powder out on the floor, which is like cocaine, and then they snort it.
Yeah.
And then they get to the giant space station from the comic, and then they just crash there, and that's the end.
And that's the end, yeah. At least it was short.
This is a real... I mean, even if you didn't like the comic, all of the theme... None of that stuff is in here. None of the Tolstoy... None of the satire of...
That's why I liked it.
The satire of hippie culture is in here. It's just nothing. It's just a nothing story.
It's just Cheech and Chong. I read, these guys are like Cheech and Chong. So these characters are not really in the comic. Instead, it's 2 stoners flying a spaceship. That's the joke. And Atlas sleeping with the buxom Jewish stenographer is the other joke. Yeah. And then the sequence ends. So it's not what you would call an adaptation. It's more of, God, would you even call it an homage? That would be doing it
inspired by?
Inspired by.
I guess.
That's better. Yeah.
But if I was Angus McKie, I'd be very insulted by
I dare say
you
would, but to me it had at least the advantage of brevity. Brevity, the soul of wit in this instance.
Yeah. Okay, so then we get to the turn...
this one does not have the advantage of brevity.
No, so this is basically
27 minutes long. Sorry, go.
Oh yeah, it is really long. It's like the last half
it's a third of the movie.
Third of the movie, yeah. So basically, it's the Loch-Nar goes into the volcano.
Yep.
And the volcano ends up being green lava.
Yep.
And the lava turns these people into mutant barbarians.
Yes.
Evil barbarians, and they attack this council of people. These can't remember what they were called.
There's a peaceful city of scholars.
Yeah.
And the barbarians lay siege to it. The scholars say, we need to call on the Tarakians, with whom we are bound.
Okay.
We have a pact with the Tarakians, the warrior race. They must come to our aid.
Yeah.
Another one of the scholars says, well, the Tarakians are all dead, so that's no good. It's like, well, I'm pretty sure there's at least one left.
Okay.
How will they know? Their blood will call to them. We just have to summon them. So they go, Tarakian. Yeah. Meanwhile, a page boy wearing pink runs off to barricade the door and is killed by the barbarians. That was a funny sequence,
actually, because the barricade is like this foot pedal.
He has to sort of pump a pedal.
Yeah.
like he's trying to pump up a mattress.
Yeah.
He's going... And it slowly goes up, it shakes. So that's funny, but then he's speared with several arrows and collapses in excruciating detail.
Yeah.
Apparently some of the animators refused to work on that sequence because they considered it so gory.
Whoa, okay.
According to that article I read. And then everyone in the city is slaughtered. Meanwhile, we get a very long and gratuitous sequence where Tana, the last of the Tarakians, has heard the call and is getting ready. Which takes about 10...
Well, so first she flies in on Arzak's bird, concrete bird.
Yes.
And she flies through the through the skeletons of the giant beasts and all the rib cages
getting a lot
and
of
stuff.
imagery that's superficially like the imagery from Moebius's eyes.
Extremely superficially, to the extent that they've missed the point that those are death images and phallic images and all that kind of stuff, and it's just a woman flying around.
And
now,
it's just really
I will admit that the flight sequences are kind of amazing. In the way they rotoscoped them, I was like, wow, how'd they do that? But it's like, they missed the point. So yeah, and then she shows up at the statue of herself, almost, it looks like.
She's naked. This was rotoscoped, so presumably they filmed this. This is a Canadian model, whose name I haven't written down. Sorry, Canadian model. But presumably they filmed her naked for a lot of this.
I don't know. You don't have to be for rotoscoping because you're drawing over it anyway. So she could just be...
Okay, I'd prefer to imagine she was fully clothed then.
Yeah.
Because this is really gratuitous, this sequence.
It was really... Yeah,
this was our weekly segment of cis-het males try and solve sexism. This is pretty...
Well,
and her outfit is true.
No, you know what? I think they were all really gratuitous. And the stuff, like, even in Den, the stuff which in the comic I would say is, I guess I'm a defender of Den, so it's sensual and
it's part of the sensuality of the piece. Even in the small section I read, it was clearly he's going for a sensibility.
Yes, but in the movie it's like
just
giant
badly
boobs.
Drawn boobs.
And you know the hairy canyon, she takes off her gown. It's such a long sequence, and her boobs are huge. I understand why Corben was deliberately trying to exaggerate sexual features of people, but why does every woman have giant boobs?
Well, does Tana have giant boobs? She's a bit more lithe than some of the other characters.
Yeah.
Because she's a warrior, but her outfit doesn't protect her at all. She's supposed to be wearing armor, but it's basically go-go boots.
Yeah.
And straps.
Yeah.
It's not going to protect you, Tana, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not your fault, Tana. You're just drawn that way.
Yeah.
Anyway, she has to take vengeance. Because the city's dead.
Yeah.
So instead of protecting them, she'll take vengeance on their behalf.
Voiceover tells us that.
That's right. She flies away on her bird, which sounds a bit like those screaming goats you can see on YouTube. Ah!
Yep. She goes to Mos Eisley. Some guys try to
I forgot about that sequence, yeah.
She gets some information. She beats up the guys.
She cuts their heads off. Yeah.
She gets some information about where the barbarian horde is. She goes to Barbarian Horde. She gets in a big fight. Pretty gory kind of very slow motion sword fight with this barbarian leader.
Really slow. Makes me think the rotoscoping sequences were probably filmed in slow motion or something.
Maybe, yeah. It looks pretty like they're just going very slow, but she gets cut up pretty bad. Finally, she beats the guy, and then she flies up to the volcano.
Sacrifices herself.
To sacrifice herself. And the volcano says to her, the Lochnar says, don't do it. It won't work, or something like that. She flies in anyway.
She has the power to turn herself into lightning. I suppose she can only do that at the moment of death, because why otherwise didn't she do it in her final fight with...
Yeah.
The big barbarian with his...
she was saving it for the Lochnar.
Yeah. And the bird is the real hero of this story, because the bird gets shot in the neck.
Yes.
Then it gets cut up by the barbarian with his buzzsaw.
Yeah.
But it still saves her from death, and then flies her to the volcano. Wow, that bird got me right in the feels.
Yeah, and then finally...
for that bird.
Then we cut back to the present Lochnar with the little girl, and the Lochnar explodes.
Right, because...
Why?
I suppose it doesn't matter, but I suppose the Lochnar is showing events that are happening all through the galaxy because it's the essence of evil.
Yep.
It's in many places at once.
Yes.
So what's occurring here is occurring at the same time for this girl in this world as it is for Tana and these other places.
What do you mean? So you mean that because the Lochnar exploded in the volcano...
I think that's clear. Because Tana sacrificed herself in that place, the Lochnar...
Oh, so there's there's 5 Lochnars. There's one...
It's in all... It's the essence of evil. It's in all places and all times.
So why did it didn't get destroyed in any other stories? Only this one?
Because it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
We're just meant to accept that what we're seeing is happening. It's happening in real time. The events that the Lochnar showing the girl are happening at that moment. They're not recordings, they're what's happening in other places. Anyway, Tana destroys the Lochnar, then the little girl is the next Tarakian.
Right.
She wanders out into the garden.
I got that. I got all that stuff. I just didn't understand why the Lochnar came here to kill this girl, and then it suddenly just dies. So... Imagine if it didn't tell her those stories, would it still be alive?
Exactly.
Like, I don't get it.
Evil is petty.
I don't get it.
Well, there's nothing to get. It's just a dumb framing device.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's stupid. Don't waste any time on it.
Yeah.
But I feel like because of Tana's sacrifice, that's what enables the girl to live and then be the next Tarakian, because she gets the mark on her neck that shows she's one of the a member of the warrior race, and her hair changes colour to silver.
I got all that, but do we need Tarakians on Earth?
Well, we do, to protect us from the Lochnar.
I thought the Tarakian was on another planet or something.
Well, they seem to have some sort of... They're tied up with the Lochnar in some, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
All right. You got any trivia for us?
I got so much trivia. All right, so this film cost $9 million to make. Its box office was $20 million.
Okay.
So a success.
Yep.
A definite success. Not a runaway success, but a success. So successful, in fact, it was briefly the highest grossing Canadian film of all time.
Amazing.
For about 3 months.
Okay.
Until the current highest grossing Canadian film of all time came out, which is Porky's.
Amazing. Double amazing.
At least the most profitable film of all time. There's some debate about what constitutes highest grossing.
Right.
But Porky's is definitely the most profitable Canadian film of all time. Cost $4 million to make, made $160 million.
Wow.
So how did this get made? Quite hard to find information about it online, as I said. But eventually I read that article that I've been quoting liberally from throughout this podcast, and as you said, it was the National Lampoon Connection. So the
that was my guess, because they were making movies at this stage.
Yeah. They were making movies, and they were making successful movies. So Leonard Mogul, the publisher of National Lampoon, as we mentioned, who was responsible for bringing it across to America, he was pretty much one of the main driving forces behind this film. He's a producer on the film.
Yeah.
Yeah. As is Ivan Reitman, who is another Canadian and a well-known film producer. They worked together on Animal House, National Lampoon's Animal House. It was the success of Animal House especially that meant investors were willing to put money into heavy metal.
Yeah.
Basically.
Do you know what year Vacation came out?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. But as you say, this is National Lampoon is making successful movies in the 1980s, very late 1970s, 1980s, so as I said before, 70 animators worked on the film from 14 countries, and there were 10 animation studios working on it. So each segment animated by a different animation studio. Even though they all look uniformly crappy, there were actually different studios working on each segment.
Right.
As we discussed, the music rights kept it from being released on home video until 1996, when it finally got a VHS release. Okay. Remake.
Okay.
Alright, so first of all, this film has a sequel.
Yes, I knew about that.
Right.
I've never seen it, but I'm aware of it.
Apparently it's terrible. So it came out in 2000, and it's sometimes called Heavy Metal 2000.
Fact 2.
Or Fact 2.
Yeah.
I just looked it up briefly. It was not a success. It went straight to DVD and VHS.
Yep. I remember the time when they were pushing it. As early as 97, I think they were. I seem to recall being in San Diego Comic-Con, and they were trying to push this Fact 2 movie that was coming out. And we're like, when's it coming out? And they're like, it'll be out, guys, don't worry. And
came out in 2000, sank without a trace.
Yeah.
There were also 2 video games. One called Fact 2, which is a direct sequel to the Heavy Metal 2000, the film.
Okay.
I haven't you can't get it?
Right.
Right. So I couldn't play it. Unfortunately, apparently it's a first-person shooter.
Okay.
That's all I have to say about that. Now, let's talk about remakes. Now, this is interesting. A remake was in development from about 2008 onwards.
Okay.
So, again, this is a film that caught people's imagination. This film has its fans.
I understand why. Without the context of the original comics, there's something weird and completely different going on here. As we mentioned at the top, there's no adult animation
Precisely.
in 1981 except for this.
So,
in the US.
2008, we have 2 people attached as the champions of a possible heavy metal film remake. Tim Miller, who was the director of Deadpool, and founded an animation studio called Blur, I believe, and comic book movie Olivian Bête Noire, David Fincher.
Who's that?
The director of Alien 3. My nemesis.
No, I knew it.
Of course you did. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. He never went on to do anything after Alien 3. These guys are big boosters for a heavy metal film.
You know what? But he did that Netflix series, Love, Death and Robots.
Okay, you are absolutely stealing my thunder, Kumar.
Okay, sorry.
Just be quiet.
Okay.
Maybe cut that. Moving on. So this hypothetical 2008 film had apparently all sorts of people It was going to be an anthology film, maybe a different director for each segment. All sorts of people were attached.
Okay.
Guillermo del Toro, Zack Snyder, Gore Verbinski, Rob Zombie.
Whoa, okay.
All willing to direct segments, but Paramount dropped it.
Okay.
They had signed up to be the distributor, but they dropped it. Again, because they didn't think there's a market for this kind of thing. This is pre-Deadpool, R-rated comic book aesthetic. No way, no one will ever go for it. And no other company sort of really got on board. Columbia maybe was sort of attached at one point, didn't happen. Then, another comic book movie Oblivion All-Star, Robert Rodriguez, purchased the film rights in 2011.
Okay.
He directed Sin City, of course.
Yeah. And Battle Angel, Alita.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
And then, but by 3 years later, 2014, he'd apparently changed his mind.
Okay.
And now was looking to make an anthology animated series for his own television network, which is called El Rey. And he described it thusly. It would be a variation of different types of animation. Classic, some hand-drawn, some digital, some mixed media. That was always great about heavy metal. Everybody did a different thing, story-dependent. And of course, this obviously sounds familiar to you, Kumar, because while this Rodriguez project never came about, we did get Love, Death and Robots, which is, of course, produced by David Fincher and Tim Miller. And it is their heavy metal project.
Yeah.
So heavy metal directly inspired Love, Death and Robots.
You don't need to pay for the name heavy metal.
Right. That's it.
Why
it's got a lot of baggage.
Why bother? It's not like that brand name.
And there's baggage, right?
Yeah.
Hey, that terrible movie with the boobs everywhere?
Yeah, or even if you didn't, like, does anybody care about that brand name? And now the magazine's gone. Anyway.
Yeah. Yes, that's right, as of this year. So I have a quote from Tim Miller. David Fincher and I tried to get a heavy metal film made for years and years. I mean, hundreds of meetings. The original movie came out in 1982, he says, but it was 81. And it was very inspirational to a lot of animators who wanted to do adult animation. So when I met David, we wanted to do something together, and he said, what about doing a new heavy metal film? Because he was an animation fan. But the world just was not ready for it at that time. But in the 10 years that we did meetings and tried to get the project along, the world came around to see adult animation as viable, and Netflix was the one willing to take a chance. So here we are. David Fincher is directing a comic book movie.
Okay, which one?
It's called The Killer, and it's coming out in November on Netflix.
Oh.
Based on a French graphic novel.
Okay.
So I guess we'll be doing that.
Yeah, if we can find the...
You heard it here first on Comic Book Movie Oblivion. This publicly available knowledge.
Yeah.
I don't have much else to add. There's been a Tana comic book, apparently.
Okay.
It came out in 2018.
Never heard of it or seen it.
I think it might have been published in Heavy Metal.
Okay.
And there was a whisper that we might get a live-action Tana film.
Weird. Okay.
Although I can't imagine who the audience would be for that.
Yeah.
That is pretty much it. Shall we do our votes?
Yes. Okay. So, again, it's an anthology, so very hard to rate these things, but comics...
Should people read Heavy Metal?
Well, okay. Should people read Arzak, The Long Tomorrow, Dan?
Yes.
Yes.
Especially
So
Arzak and The Long Tomorrow and Skip So Beautiful.
I'm going to say even that one I think was pretty interesting.
The comics that we've talked about, a lot of them, I think all of them really, are pretty good.
Yeah.
Some spectacular art. Some really... the fact that The Long Tomorrow is tremendously influential in the genre of cyberpunk, to me, is just mind-blowing that I barely knew about it. I knew that there was a connection with The Fifth Element, although I don't really think of The Fifth Element as a cyberpunk film. But to read it, and then read the kind of things that people have to say about it and how important they consider it, it's astonishing to me that it's not better known. So go and read that at the very least. So that's a full-throated yay from me.
Right. Yeah, me too.
Phil.
Oh. God, I wanted to like it. I really wanted to like it. And I had those vague memories of it. I'm like, surely it's cool. Some of the rotoscoping does look... I still think it's kind of cool. Like, I think the Bakshi stuff was cool. That whole aesthetic, the rotoscoping aesthetic, is something that appeals to me.
Right.
I wanted to like it, but I just feel it's such a... I feel like Harry Kingen violates or does not understand the themes of The Long Tomorrow. I think Dan does not understand the themes of Dan. I think So Beautiful does not understand the themes of So Beautiful. So for me, it's a nay. I mean, and it doesn't look like the beauty of those. If you look at the posters, one of the Heavy Metal movie posters is actually done by Corben of Dan, and it's awesome, and it looks nothing like what's in the movie. And it's... But
yes, that's fair. Although you might be anticipating your adaptation answer with that answer.
Yes, that's true.
For me, it's a tentative yay.
Okay.
I have the same reservations you do.
That's fair.
But I think it's got some good stories. I think it has great music. Like, we haven't talked much about the music, but there's a lot of really cool music in
I'm going to swap to yay. You're right, because when I think about it without the comics, you're right. It's actually, on its own, it's okay. There's some stuff that's not, you're right.
It really does look ugly, but...
I jumped to adaptation. I shouldn't have done that.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, the comics are really important to you. You're the comics guy. I get it. I mean, but, and this is also an influential film.
Yes,
so it's kind of, it's almost worth watching just for that. Now, there's a quote from Peter Capaldi, who played the 12th Doctor, right?
Yeah.
He's talking about the early episodes of Doctor Who.
Okay.
And about the kind of influence they had. He said, those old shows were only made to be watched once, on a flickering, monochrome telly that smelled of valves and furniture polish. In that context, they succeeded immeasurably. They were triumphs of imagination. It may surprise you now, but something like The Webbed Planet lived powerfully and expansively in my head for decades. Until the DVDs came along and spoiled the party.
This is the nostalgia thing we come back to episode after episode.
Episode after episode.
Yeah.
So for people that saw this at the time, or who watched it on a crappy VHS tape, or at a midnight screening, this was the business.
Yes, absolutely.
Mind-blowing. And if I think you can try and watch it and try and imagine or try and capture a little of that magic when you see it. And I think it's worth a look.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, actually. Yeah. I think you're right.
But as for adaptation, I completely agree with you. Oh my god, why would a person read heavy metal? Only an idiot would say for the tits. But that's what makes it really into this film.
Yeah, absolutely. They missed the point. The point was not that there were naked women in it.
It's not, the art doesn't make it, the aesthetic sensibility doesn't make it, the ideas don't make it.
No. The ideas,
You just get boobs. Oh, look, boobs. That's what this heavy metal comic's about. Rotoscope boobs.
They rotoscoped some lady and tripled the size of her breasts.
They did. Apparently, I didn't notice, but according to TV tropes, the lady in the Fifth Element story,
the Harry Canyon one.
The Harry Canyon story, her boobs double in size halfway through and you don't even notice. Terrible.
They should have actually done it. They should have made it really obvious and done it like 4 or 5 times to make it like really obvious that they were doing it, and then it would have like hit in a Moebius kind of way, not like it is in this.
Although I have one small caveat.
Okay.
And that's that the choice of bands for the film, to my mind, constitutes an effective adaptational choice, because some of the songs I think really suit. I mean, they're not all heavy metal bands, but I feel like some of the songs really suit the kind of style they're going for.
Yes.
That would be my one caveat to that otherwise resounding nay for adaptation.
Okay.
Next week.
Okay. We're going to have a little cut here because we actually...
Okay. And I paused when I talked about... You might want to cut out that bit about Peter Capaldi if you want. It might be a little too... off.
No, we'll leave it in. That's fine.
I just, that's why I paused at that point.
That's right, 138.
I listened to a bit of last week's episode, and I caught the... As I told you, I caught the... That was so funny.
Yeah.
I laughed really loudly and everyone looked at me. God, it was funny. And I didn't... So, and you ran the program that cuts out the pauses?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying hard not to and to just pause instead so that it will cut it out.
Yeah.
Because I didn't notice it. It sounded really good.
Good.
I could tell, I think, when one happened, but just because I was listening for it, I reckon it sounded really good. Yeah.
Because it actually it doesn't cut them completely. You can adjust it. You can put settings whatever you want for how long you want the gap to be.
Brilliant.
And stuff.
No, it sounded perfect.
Okay, now the only reason I'm pausing because we were planning on TMNT 90 next week.
Yes.
But this week was the 25th anniversary of Blade. So...
How can it be 25 years since that film?
How can it be? But do we want to do...
Yes, hell yes.
Blade instead of TMNT?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
I love that. Oh my god. Oh man, I haven't seen it since I saw it in the cinema.
I saw it in the cinema twice. Once in Canada, once in Japan.
I can't believe it's been 25 years.
Yep. Okay, so next week, we're a little bit late, but we're going to cover Blade, which just celebrated the 25th anniversary of its release.
25 years.
Yeah.
Since I saw it in the cinemas.
Yeah, me too. I never saw it on video. I think I only saw it in the cinemas twice.
I don't think I've seen it since I saw it at the cinemas.
Well, I'm not sure what my memory is. It's one of the most badass movies ever made. And hopefully it holds up
I can't wait to see.
But I just started seeing the 25th anniversary articles popping up, and I'm like, oh, we better hit that. So
Absolutely.
that's what we'll be getting to.
Can't wait.